can't believe I can finally say these words again. Welcome to a meta-analysis. Results are finally back, and while we don't have any big tournaments going on for quite some time now, we have to do, work with what we have, and that is mostly shop tournaments, but they still give us a good insight of what the meta is shaping up to be. So, I suppose for the people that have joined us ever since Zero has come out, welcome, welcome. This is a thing that we do on a pretty much like monthly, sometimes even more frequently basis, usually on a set-by-set basis, but I might make this more frequent because, things are coming out pretty quick, and usually what I do is I wait for the English release of a set before doing this. So, instead, I want to take a look at things like from the Japanese release side, and we're going away from V-BT08 to V-BT09 very soon in the Japanese format, so I want to kind of look at this before it changes, because that will be most relevant, for us in September, but for Japan it's basically like gonna lose its relevancy very soon. But I think a lot of these decks will stay very, very good for quite some time. And of course, with these, we're gonna be using not just Dexander today, but a secondary source as well. But of course, to those of you that have never met him, Dexander is a guy on Twitter who runs a blog, and he runs a very amazing blog because he reports on basically all the tournament results that happen in both Japan and the West. And of course, we don't really have any tournaments in the West right now outside of like Vision Cups, and basically so he's using a lot of the shop tournament wins and tops to make this kind of meta chart, just piling up all the results and then seeing which one comes out on top in this little pie chart. So without any further ado, let's take a look at what we have here. So here comes Dexander's, let me just not get too close here. Here is Dexander's pie chart. So as you can see, we have a pretty interesting show of results. So this is post V-BT08, which has support for, of course, Kagero, Link Joker, Dimension Police, and Oracle Think Tank. And so as you see, a lot of these clans do come out on top from that booster, but quite a few other clans that did not get support in that set are also still staying on top with quite a lot of tops on their own. So looking at, of course, basically a quarter, a bit more than a quarter of the pie chart is taken up by Kagero. Now, of course, this is because the cross is a very, very popular unit. However, it's not actually entirely the cross either, because this 26% is actually comprised of 85% the cross decks and then 15% Blade Master decks. So Blade Master, even though nobody's really making noise about it, nobody's really like talking about it that much, it is getting tops. It is actually doing pretty well. It is actually doing its job, and it's, I think it might even be in a lot of people's eyes the better Kagero deck because of how just destructive it is to a lot of decks that cannot deal with the mass retire. But the cross, of course, is the fan favorite, one of the most popular decks ever created, I would say, in general. And I can actually sit back like this now that we're talking about cards, because I just have the little pop-up over here. But the cross itself is a really interesting card because, like, when it came out, I immediately kind of released this video talking about how good I actually think it is, and I still stand by the exact same opinion. They got that one grade 1 that restands now, which of course makes the deck somewhat better, but I think it's a really good deck. It's definitely very strong. But do I think it's like the best deck? Absolutely not. Like, I don't think it's the best deck, but it is the most popular, and therefore everyone needs to have experience playing against it, otherwise you're gonna get crushed by it, because it is quite oppressive, and if you face it for the first few times, you might think, oh my god, this thing is so broken, but then you kind of realize that it has quite a few glaring weaknesses, such as the fact that, even though it does get to restand, 2 times, attack 3 times, and all of them having drive checks, it's still quite fragile in that sense. It has to commit a lot to it, and one of its biggest strengths is that it can kind of work solo. It doesn't need to depend on a field, but of course any deck that has a field that can swing for big numbers on top of the Vanguard will do better. But this deck is very much like, oh, you retire my whole board? Well, I can still swing with Vanguard 3 times, and that's all I need. So it's interesting with that in mind. Blade Master, as I said, very strong because of that just instant field pop and being able to generate vision tokens and generate a lot of advantage, and unlike the cross, have a nice field because it got some cool new support cards that helps it do that. So I think both Kagero variants are very good and of course very popular. Then we move on to let's put back the pie chart here. We move on to Link Joker, which has shown itself at 20%, almost 21, with 31 tops, and 97% of this is Messiah and 3% Brandt. So Brandt came out on top in one single tournament probably, and I guess that makes sense because Brandt is kind of like, if your opponent gets lucky, they actually, get it reversed against them. If you don't know what Brandt does, it basically just like reverses your opponent triggers effects, but that's not the focus here. We've talked about Brandt last year enough. Messiahs are arguably the best deck from this last set, and while some people in Japan have noticed, I watched some other Japanese content creators, they will emphasize the fact that while Messiah has like a really high ceiling and it can pop off like crazy, you know, Volko just does insane things, it generates extra attacks, generates extra power, you know, and you like, it's just, the deck can really pop off with crazy, you know, multi-attack combos. But a lot of Japanese players, they emphasize that this is a piece-reliant deck, and that if you don't hit your Volko, if you don't hit your Lady Fencer, and you know, you don't hit those essential components that are necessary to make those multi-attacks, it's just not really gonna do as much. And you know, there's people really emphasizing this point that, or of like even writing articles or making videos of like how you should play Messiah if you brick, like, because the deck is very popular, so everyone's really excited about it, everyone really likes Messiah, understandably so, and so a lot of people are emphasizing this fact that like you need to be able to play it well even when it bricks, even when you don't draw Volko or the Order or the Lady Fencer or that other grade 2 that, like, you know, after attacking put something down as locked, but because like the deck can really pop off. So like, for example, I need to talk about the actual cards. So Alter Ego, Messiah, he basically just fills up your board from the drop zone with locked cards, and it also just basically unlocks everything when it attacks, so it gives you multi-attacks, because you have cards like Volko. Volko says basically at the end of its attack, you lock it and give something plus 10k. So he's a 30k base grade 4 that you have to just call out from your drop zone as locked, or, you know, call as locked from one of your effects. And basically it just swings for 30, gives something 10k, locks itself, so then when the Alter Ego attacks, it unlocks that Volko, so it technically restands, so it can attack again with a 30k base plus whatever boost is behind it, which means that you're able to once again swing for a big number and give the 10k to something else. Lady Fencer also does a similar thing where she attacks and unlocks herself, and then you also have that grade 2 I mentioned, which I forgot the name of, but basically calls something as locked from your hand and therefore is able to just, you know, regenerate your field and also put up those Volkos as locked as well, that you can then unlock with Alter Ego's skill. Now, of course, there's also like nice draw engine powers, like the Van Manen. That's a very nice card that lets you draw more cards. So you have a lot of ways to draw those pieces. And so this deck, it's very popular and it's very strong. That's like the two main things about it. It's just, it really is a well-made deck. It's well-shaped, well made, but a lot of people would say that Volko is a little bit too strong for this deck, and that's what makes it a little bit too crazy, because of course when they draw their pieces, the deck just obliterates you, so that is one thing to keep in mind. So Link Joker, very popular, very strong, takes up a big portion. Royal Paladin is 96% Majesty Lord Blaster, 4% Alt Mile. Alt Mile has not really been shining too much lately, although it looks like it will pick up in the future, because the deck is now kind of resurging in popularity a little bit, and people are noticing that the deck is pretty strong, but of course it does rely on this gimmick of always counterblasting your stuff in order to have like the effects, actually the buffs, go off. So you run into these situations where like, oh, you didn't draw that card that you needed to counterblast with, well, too bad, you know. Even if you get the search, sometimes it really can, it's kind of hard to deal with what you're put into, and you need to be careful with how you guard, careful how you construct your field and things like that to actually make use of those buffs. So, but Old Mile is still very, very strong. It's very explosive especially, and you know, it's a great deck. MLB, Majesty Lord Blaster, on the other hand, it's also explosive, but it takes its time to develop into that explosiveness, because it generates basically 2 to 3 force markers per turn, depending if you ride or not. Usually you only ride MLB once, and then you call the other MLBs as rears, because you want to make use of that passive crit. And MLB is good because it has that defensive power from being 18k in your opponent's turn, and then you generate force markers every turn, so your turn just scale and scale and scale and scale, but that first grade 3 turn is not as scary. Alt Mile's first grade 3 turn is like, poof, just explosive as hell, you know? Whereas MLB's is like, it's strong, it's very consistent, it's very searchy, they can search all the time, and they also have a strong grade 2 turn as well because of Blaster Dark, being able to drive an extra card, you know, on turn 2, which is very nice and can apply extra pressure. But MLB kind of takes its time to develop into that like strong kind of like presence in the game, but it's still of course very strong. Like, it answers any matchup very, very well because of how it is made. Oracle Think Tank, now OTT 12%, 18 whole tops. OTT is a deck that is being kind of slept on, I would say, because like Susano is just a very strong card all in all, because it basically gives you additional drive checks, and you know, like the new Amaterasu has been talked about by a lot of people, you know, being like explosive and crazy strong and giving you crit, you know, and all that stuff. But at first I think people looked at the deck like, oh, like, I mean, like it seems like it has like weak columns, and like Ichikishima isn't even that good and like all that stuff, but the deck can manipulate itself in such an interesting way that you can just get blown up on turn 3 really easily by the sheer amount of things that it can do, you know, through the supporting cards. Like, I don't remember the names of these cards too well, but there are like supporting grade 1s and 2s that basically allow you to keep checking top cards of the deck every turn very consistently and make use of those effects when revealed, such as Ichishima and the new Amaterasu. So OTT is very, very good. Now, we haven't looked at these results of next stage at all because it didn't have any because of you know, quarantine period, but Gear Chronicle still at 6%, and Gear Chronicle keeps popping up over and over and over again. Like, Gear Chronicle next stage really came in, and just at first people were like, I mean, this deck seems pretty good, but is it really that amazing? Like, you know, people started complaining about next stage like not working unless your opponent is at grade 3, but I mean, they're replicating Stride, so it makes sense. But people kind of, at first it seemed like people underestimated it, and then it turned out to be pretty good, and now it's like basically the deck from the next stage that is really, really topping still and can consistently do well. Because, I mean, think of it this way. The deck has multi-attack, it has huge power scaling thanks to Chronojet and like next stage in combination, guard restrict also thanks to Chronojet. On top of that, you have Nabu as a guard restrict and soul filling. This deck runs out of soul pretty easily, I would say. And then like Smoke Gear, I believe, the grade 2 that lets you discard anything for Stride, is like just an amazing card in general. And people have been teching in Mazer Gear as well, such as Nuno Raimundo, the world champion, to kind of like make use of the retire together with Stroboscope. And we've seen a decrease in the ear cups, which are the extra drive check givers, where we're kind of seeing them go out of list entirely because that extra drive check doesn't really bring too much to the deck. It's just an extra card, but like using Stroboscope and the Mazer Gear brings you 2 pops basically that is also very good against quite a lot of decks as well. And so that's kind of an interesting meta call, but also the deck is just very strong. Like, it really is a really well-rounded deck, and that's cool to see. Now DP has 4% here, so we see just some Blad, Black, and, you know, Dyneliner topping. I've talked about this deck quite a lot in its own video. I think the deck is quite strong. There's a lot of unexplored territory with DP right now, I would say too, because I don't think this is reported yet in this thing, but I'm going to show you the next source that we're going to look at. Like, DP has, thanks to Blad Black, you can really build a deck in very interesting ways. Like, you have Blad Liner, you have Blad Sinbuster, you have Blad with like Miracle Beauty and Great Ayusha or without Great Ayusha, and just there's so many different builds, and I feel like Miracle Beauty herself hasn't been explored enough yet because those builds could also be really, really good that I feel like we haven't really given them enough testing, myself included. I'm waiting for some of my cards to arrive to do that. And so we also saw even like some Gallop tops that aren't in this list actually, so I feel like, you know, DP actually has a pretty nice showing right now, and we're gonna need to see some more. So it's nice, you know, it's not as dominant as it was last year. Last year was kind of like the answer to Bermuda because of all the cards that it had, but this year it's kind of like, it's there. It's like a lot of these decks that don't have many tops, they're still considered very, very good. Then we have 3% Mordred, so those are 5 tops, with 4 of them being Mordred, 1 of them being Claret. So, I mean, Mordred is last year's kind of like still strong Shadow deck, where it's just like, you know, multi-attacks with big numbers, let's put it that way, plus, you know, retire. And then Claret is much more of the, like, just like, go into it, restand, you know, try to push your opponent as much as possible on turn 3, but then it's kind of a glass cannon where it doesn't really manage to, like, defend itself very well after that because of how many resources you put into it. And then we have Aquaforce with 3 Revon tops, as well as Neo Nectar with 1 Asha top, and Mega Colony with 1 Gunning Colio top, and then just a bit of Angel Feather with, I believe, Malkuth Melek. Yeah, so just a few tops there. So those are the decks that like didn't get as many tops, but they're still very nice. Like Asha, consistent, you know, damaging, and just being able to consistently make these like really strong pressure columns where your opponent's just kind of like staring at 2 Fury Plant token, and they're just like, well, I don't know what to do now, you know. And then Aquaforce Revon is still good. It isn't as great against some of these newer decks because, like, you know, like MLB losing 5k is just like, oh, I went back to normal, you know. And then Mega Colony Gunning Colio uses the order that came out in this set, actually, the one that restands something. So basically, using that with Gunning Colio, I think it's pretty interesting. I haven't already seen the list too much, but it's an interesting concept. So that got a couple tops. And then Malkuth Melek is a deck I already already covered myself. Basically, I mean, I go in pretty high depth in that deck profile, so I would recommend to check it out. But because it's already taking up a bit of time, I want to show you this other visual from 2crit. So 2crit is like the Japanese place for like information for Vanguard. So whether it's like tournament results or like news, you know, about product releases and like sleeves and whatever else, what have you, really. And they basically compile every week the like percentages of decks that win shop tournaments right now, and they do little like cool little videos of like 30-40 seconds to show this. And basically I recommend you give them a follow on Twitter, absolutely. But here is their kind of like graphic for this exact meta. So here we see that, for example, we have like Overlord with 26%. It really reflects for the most part like Overlord, MLB, Messiah really showing up, and then Altmal 8% with 5 tops. So here Altmal is really showing up much more. Oracle with 6%, you know, with 4 Susano tops. Dimension Police suddenly got 4 tops, so 6% as well. And then Bermuda coming back with Revere, and I think also like honestly quite a few Bermuda decks are pretty potent. Like, let's not forget that Melody basically is still a pretty strong deck that can just randomly pop off and like swing at you for massive numbers with Force 2. That's something to still consider, I would say. And then Shadows, like this really reflects like Dexander's list as well, of just like also like some Shadow tops and then a bunch of others. So this is pretty interesting. This is as recent as it gets, so this is from the 16th up to the 16th of July. So I think it's pretty cool, and so they do these like every week. So if you're impatient to hear from me about what the meta is looking like, then you can look at those. I might do, if you guys, you know, still enjoy these meta-analyses, what I might do is maybe in a few weeks we'll just like take, let's say like 3 weeks worth of these and look at how the meta has evolved over 3 weeks, for example. I think that could be also pretty interesting to see. But yeah, like honestly, this is an exciting meta, and looking at the Double Crit website as well, it really shows that like we basically have this meta of like Kagero being super popular and getting tops, MLB being the most accessible competitive deck because of the MLB set, you know, basically being a $70 just competitive deck out of the box, and then Messiah's being very strong and, you know, super explosive, but they emphasize that it's very piece reliant. And then the other decks like, you know, Altmal, Susano, Blood Black, like those decks really just still showing up in these tournaments and like not really kind of like giving up, let's say, not, you know, converting to the meta decks and still being able to get some tops. So it's a pretty diverse meta, even though we can say that like, yes, it's like the like, you know, Overlord, Majesty Lord, as well as Messiahs are kind of like the top 3. I'd say that it's still a pretty diverse meta because the other decks feel very close in skill level or in power level, but they're just not as popular. Like, how can you be as popular as MLB or Overlord, you know? Like, those are the clans, the decks of Vanguard. Link Joker, for example, is a very expensive deck, and that's part of the reason why it doesn't have as many tops. So yeah, that's kind of it for me today. I think this was a very interesting and honestly refreshing look at the meta. I really missed doing these, looking back at like the tops and how things are doing in the game right now. And so we'll do this again probably in a few weeks. Maybe I'll do that kind of like for the next set when the Butterfly the Moonlight set comes out. We'll probably do like after 2 weeks of it being out, maybe, or 3 weeks of it being out, we're gonna take a look at like the kind of like, you know, how it's shaped up so far before we do a final meta-analysis before this set goes away. Because right now, these results are without the Bang Dream set, which already is out, but Bang Dream set comes out, like, it came out, and then there's like 2 weeks later, there's Butterfly the Moonlight, so that's also like, you know, we'll just incorporate those results into Butterfly the Moonlight and see how they keep up. But yeah, on that note, that's basically gonna be it for me today. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. You know, it's nice to be doing this again, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.